Welcome to the 2024 Maserati GranTurismo Trofeo PrimaSerie, or first edition. I already filmed a Canyon review of this car to explore whether this nearly 4,100 pound Grand Touring sports car from Maserati is any good to drive when you really start pushing it. But today I'm going to talk about how this car is to live with on a daily basis. I've been daily driving this for the last 5 days. As you can see, I started with a full tank of gas. Now I'm down to 23 miles of range. But let's talk about how this car is as a daily driver. The first edition, or PrimaSerie, starts at over $260,000. That's an insane price, no matter which way you look at it. But Maserati only made 75 of these for the worldwide market. 50 of them came to the United States and Canada. That being said, this is mechanically identical to the Trofeo GranTurismo, which starts at $205,000. You can get the base model Modena for a little over $160,000. That has the same 3-liter twin turbocharged V6 engine as this, although it's detuned to make just over 480 horsepower. This one makes 542. It's the same Nettuno engine in the Maserati MC20 supercar. Double wishbone front suspension, multi-link rear, air suspension with ride height adjustment that happens on the fly depending on which drive mode you're in. You can also manually adjust that using this button down here. And we have adaptive dampers. We're currently in GT mode, which is what the car defaults to when you turn it on. We can dial it back to comfort, which makes the exhaust even quieter and makes the overall car just feel more subdued. Very relaxing, in fact. As a GT, that's exactly what you'd expect, and this car definitely delivers on that front. So let's talk about overall comfort. Granted, I don't have much experience with this segment of GT sports cars, but when I first heard that this car was over $260,000, for some reason I expected near Mercedes S-Class levels of ride comfort and refinement. That is not the case here. Don't be fooled. This is not going to be as plush as a full-size luxury sedan, but that doesn't mean it's not an extremely refined vehicle. In the comfort and GT modes, and the dampers in full soft, and the ride height as high as it'll go, it's extremely comfortable. Excellent compliance over bumps, very quiet, very little road noise. The glass is actually double glazed, and so the overall experience is just very serene and relaxing. In terms of interior, the build quality is very nice. I don't think it feels like a $260,000 plus car. Stitched leather across the dash, perforated on this section here. Sonus Faber 19 speaker sound system. Does sound really good, but actually I was expecting a little bit more. I think the bass could be a little bit deeper, the trebles could be a little bit crisper. But I'm no audiophile, that's just my impression compared to something like an S-Class, which I think has one of the best sound systems that at least I've ever heard in a car. Perforated leather steering wheel, 3-spoke design, very nice actuation to these column-mounted paddle shifters which control the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission. Super satisfying click. Split screen design to the infotainment and the climate controls, which I have very mixed feelings about. On the one hand, I do like the fact that they didn't integrate all of the climate controls into the main screen, because that just gets distracting when you're trying to navigate. Say you're going somewhere new and you also want to adjust the climate controls, but when you do that, now you don't know where you're going because the screen is being used. In that respect, I like that, and most of the controls here are dedicated. You don't have to do a whole lot of swiping or opening of menus to be able to do things like turn on and off the heated steering, the heated and ventilated seats. Where I do have a problem with this is the bottom screen is mounted quite low. Even the main infotainment display, Maserati didn't want to give it the tacked-on tablet look, so they mounted it just below the middle air vents. This second screen is mounted way too low. No physical control, so I have to look at the screen, but now my eyes are way off the road. Bit of a safety issue in my opinion. I would prefer just having the infotainment up here. Based on my seating position, I could have about this much display without actually affecting my view of the road at all, which is just about the same height as this screen here. This has the optional ADAS system, or Advanced Driving Assists system, and it works great. For the most part, I will say. There are a couple of flaws, namely when I'm using the radar cruise control and the automatic lane detection with lane centering, basically having everything on to minimize the amount of input I have to give the car. I tried that last night and it was dark, although the lanes were still very well labeled. The paint wasn't faded or anything like that, but the system kept turning on and off and on and off, saying it couldn't properly detect the lanes. And every time it turns on or off, it makes a really kind of loud, jarring noise. It was just doing it every few seconds until eventually I got frustrated, turned everything off. One thing I haven't been able to figure out is how, if possible, can you actually use the lane centering without using the radar cruise control? Like in my Integra Type S, there's just a dedicated button on the steering wheel for the lane centering. I don't have to be using the cruise control to use that. But other than that, the radar cruise control works very, very well. You can set your follow distance in 4 different settings. Listen to that. The turn signals. The sound is a bit weird. It's like hollow and metallic at the same time. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Other things about the interior design that I don't like: piano black plastic for these buttons. At least they're physical buttons, so I'll give them that. But look at that, already smeared with fingerprints. Same thing with this display. The bezels are quite large and yeah, surrounded by piano black. Also, these buttons to control the transmission, I absolutely hate this. I'd rather have even a stock mounted to the steering column. Not only are these piano black and prone to fingerprints, but the actuation of the buttons themselves feels cheap. And you actually have to press them pretty hard. There were a few times the first couple of days I had the car where I actually wasn't pressing the button hard enough. You get used to it, but still the fact that I have to reach for the button versus just have it readily available here or here is a bit annoying. I get it, it does save some space here. You get a little storage compartment here, and you can more easily reach the wireless phone charger. But even if they went with the buttons, I just wish they would have designed higher quality buttons with better actuation. Maybe some brushed aluminum buttons, for example. Again, just not quite fitting of its asking price. These buttons feel like they belong in a car 1/5 the price. Of course, you have your standard wireless Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, and it all works very well. I've had no issues with the car automatically connecting to the Android Auto. Some other touch points of the interior worth pointing out is this digital sort of clock in the middle that also shows you other functions. Like when my phone starts charging wirelessly, there will be a little icon here. Also, the finish on these doors is excellent. One thing I'm not a huge fan of, but I have gotten used to, is this button down here in lieu of a door handle. We've got auto stop start when we're in comfort mode. Very limited space here in this center console. You do have a USB A and C port. And interestingly enough, they decided to go with a touchscreen button in order to open the glove box. Although you can't close it with the button, which is kind of weird. Like I said, I've been driving this car around for 5 days now, and when I was driving conservatively, mostly around town and on the highway, I was averaging around 18 miles per gallon. After I ripped it in the canyons for about half an hour, that dropped to 16.5 miles per gallon. Let's try putting this into Corsa mode. Manual for the transmission. 3rd gear. Yeah, it's got plenty of straight line performance. 542 horsepower, over 500 pound-feet of torque. Even in a nearly 4,100 pound car, it's plenty of straight line performance. 0 to 60 rated at 3.3 seconds with this all-wheel drive system, quarter mile in the mid 11s. And the one thing that I definitely will give this GranTurismo over some of its GT competitors is actually the fact that the rear seats are quite usable. In my current driving position, I'm 5'7", about 165 pounds, I'm able to sit behind myself and still have maybe half an inch to an inch of headroom. Legroom is a bit limited, but I could definitely see myself sitting in the back seat for, say, 30 minutes, maybe up to an hour at a time. Try doing that in an LC500 or most of the other 2+2 GTs out there, and you will not be happy. Let's demonstrate the driving assists here. We'll turn on the active driving assist. I'll set the radar cruise control to 77 miles an hour, and I'll make sure that the active lane management is on. Does a pretty good job. But again, at this price point, I would expect a GT to be able to do everything that this does. My main complaint with this car is the price. All of the little quibbles aside with the usability of the tech and everything, minor issues, no car is perfect, every car has quirks, but pricing this at $260,000+ makes no sense to me. At that price, you're looking at Aston Martin territory, and you get a much more special engine. And to put things into further perspective, you can get an LC500 for less than half the price. At around 105 to 110, a nicely spec'd LC500 will have arguably an even nicer interior, less performance, yes, because it has a naturally aspirated V8 and it's a few hundred pounds heavier than this versus the relatively unexotic V6 Growl. It just doesn't feel special enough from an engine perspective to justify that kind of price point. Even at the $205,000 starting price of the Trofeo, at $160 to $170 for a Trofeo, I think there's a really good argument for this car, but at 200 plus, not so much. But please do watch my Canyon review of this car, because from a driving dynamics standpoint, this thing does really, really well. Very impressive handling for such a heavy car, and the all-wheel drive system gives you plenty of confidence. The ZF 8-speed transmission, it's not as quick or smooth as in some other applications, namely in BMWs, but there is more drama to it because you feel the shifts more. And the straight line performance definitely is unquestionable, especially with the all-wheel drive traction. But if you ask me, if I were to spend my money on a Grand Touring sports car, the hardest justification for this is the fact that you can get an LC500 for less than half the price. That's where I struggle with this car. Objectively, it's a very good car in just about every way. It really is only the pricing that I struggle with here. But I am very glad that Maserati has put focus into driving dynamics once more. This is a car that you really can have a lot of fun with when you start pushing it. The question is, if you're spending this much money on a Maserati, you're probably going for the brand recognition. And Maserati hasn't been known for making excellent driver's cars for a long time. And so realistically, do you expect the target demographic for this car to actually drive it hard? I'm not sure, but on the surface, it doesn't seem like that would be the case. So those are just my quick thoughts from daily driving the Maserati GranTurismo Trofeo PrimaSerie for the last 5 days. Shout out to Maserati for bringing back some enthusiasm into their driving dynamics. Let me know what you think about the new GranTurismo. Do you think the old one is really the way to go with that naturally aspirated high revving V8? Or do you think the superior chassis dynamics of the second gen GranTurismo overcome the relative lack of engine character? Or is all of that irrelevant because this car is just too expensive? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.